Every great off-road build involves adding accessories, and sometimes those can affect your suspension, and today we're going to talk a little bit more about that. Gross vehicle weight rating is the weight of the vehicle specified by the manufacturer, and it's the maximum vehicle weight, and that's fully loaded with fuel. That includes the passengers, that includes any accessories you've added, and that includes any weight in the bed or cargo inside. Knowing the gross vehicle weight rating is important to know if you kind of understand the background and where it came from. It's specified by the OEM manufacturer, and they've looked at the capacity of the frame, they've looked at the capacity of the braking system, they've looked at the capacity of the stock wheels and tires, they've looked at the capacity of the stock axles and the size of the bearings. And so it's really the manufacturers, taking their time and said, this is what this vehicle can do. And it's important to know when you start building your vehicle so that you don't build it to exceed that weight, because it could create a dangerous situation. Not all weight is the same. Depending on what accessories you're adding and how you're modifying your vehicle, there's both sprung weight and unsprung weight. Sprung weight is all of the weight that's above the springs and on the chassis, and so it's kind of things like the bumpers and winch, any occupants, how many people and passengers are in the car, do you have any cargo in the back, do you have a bed full of lumber, do you have a rooftop tent, do you have a spare tire off the back. That's kind of all considered sprung weight. Probably the lowest thing in sprung weight is also like skid plates, that's rock sliders. Those are all considered sprung weight because it's all weight being carried by the springs of the vehicle. So unsprung weight is all of the weight that's kind of below the springs, and you can kind of think of it as like weight that's just being supported by the ground but not by the springs. And so on like an independent suspension front end, you've got things like some amount of the control arms, you've got the knuckle, you've got wheel bearings, brakes, and then your wheel and tire package. In the front, that's kind of all considered unsprung weight. On like a classic rear end or a solid axle, you've got some amount of the leaf springs, you've got wheels and tires, you've got the weight of the axle. And so it's kind of all that stuff that's kind of below your springs is considered unsprung weight. So when you add more sprung weight, it's more weight that needs to be carried by the springs and the shocks. And so if they're not made for that, what happens is that the vehicle starts to sit down lower in the travel, and that reduces the amount of up travel that you have. So you're more likely to bottom out because the suspension just can't travel as far. And then on top of that, you've kind of started overwhelming your springs and shocks because you've got more weight than they were meant to carry. And that can lead to a lot of bounciness, kind of a rolling loose feel in the suspension, reduced handling. If you're off-road or hitting big dips, it's more likely to bottom out, and to bottom out, hard. And it can also cause harshness sometimes in suspension. It depends a little bit on your configuration, but sometimes it can cause harsh problems. You can get into the overloads in the springs. The shocks aren't adequate to slow the wheels down, and so the wheels get out of control. And so if you add too much sprung weight, it can really reduce the performance of your suspension. So unsprung weight is interesting because it's not supported by the springs, but it does affect the ride quality of your suspension. And if you're doing like aftermarket wheels and tires, it will affect it. You kind of got to think about like when you're going over a bump or a dip in the road, the more that your unsprung weight weighs, the harder it is to react and to follow the road. And so it can actually start to affect your ride quality and make it not as comfortable, because the tire just can't follow the road, or if it does hit a bump, it's got more inertia and the shock is working harder to control it. And so when you're modifying your vehicle, you do want to try to reduce the amount of unsprung weight, and it will make a noticeable impact on the ride quality. If you've added more sprung weight to your vehicle, the first thing you want to look at is your springs. And that both comes from getting your ride height fixed so the vehicle looks good, also making sure that you have an adequate amount of up travel and down travel so your suspension has room to move comfortably. And then also from a spring rate perspective of making sure that the springs are stiff enough to really carry that weight and not be too bouncy. If you got, a lot of weight and you've got like a stock spring rate, it's going to be really bouncy and floaty and kind of out of control. And so then once you've fixed your spring rate and you've got your ride height correct, the next thing you want to address is your shocks and your shock tuning. If you've got the right springs but the wrong shocks, it can still compress probably too easily, and then it can kind of rebound out too quickly, and it can cause it to kind of, bounce up and down the road and be kind of out of control. You can have some sloppy handling. And so once you fix your springs, then you want to go in and fix your shocks and your shock tuning and make sure that's all set up for the springs that you're running. Once you've got a good working package, you're really going to be getting, the best ride quality. And a lot of times with added weight, we can get ride quality kind of back to stock because everything's just working right. It's all working together. And so, getting the right shocks and springs is really the right solution for, dealing with added weight. When it comes to unsprung weight, in dealing with it, it's a little bit trickier because it's below the springs, and so there's not a lot that we can do to mitigate that. It's just kind of a penalty that you're paying. And I'm not saying don't get, bigger tires, don't get, cool aftermarket wheels, like you should do all those things, but be mindful of the weight and just be aware that there is a ride quality penalty to pay. And so when you're looking at wheels and tires, take a look at what they weigh. And, if you've got two styles of wheel that you like, maybe lend some extra credence to the lighter weight version. And also when picking tires, there's like, if you go from like load range C to load range E, the load range E is just overall a stiffer tire, but it's also a lot heavier. And so both of those things are going to affect ride quality. And so, there's not a lot we can do. There's some minor tweaks on suspension tuning, but really for the average customer, the best thing you can do is just be mindful of it and try and select the lightest wheel and tire you can. Everybody loves a great vehicle build. We love adding accessories. It's fun, improved capability, and the unfortunate downside is sometimes it has some negative effects on the suspension. If your suspension's suffering or you're planning on doing a build and you don't want to have those problems, reach out to us. We're happy to help you get that sorted out so that you can ride in comfort and get the best performance possible.